She vanished, but it took 4 months before anyone even noticed. That was the opening line in an internal report the family never got to see. A young mother, Keisha Williams, 28, and her 3-year-old son, Jalen, left their small apartment in South Atlanta for a short trip to Okefenokee National Park. She sent one last message to her best friend. "I just need a few days to myself. No phone, just me and my baby." And after that, complete silence, no alarm, no phone calls, no one knocking at the door. Keisha was a single mom, a night shift nurse, living far from relatives, barely known to her neighbors, and in America, sometimes, when a black woman goes missing, it doesn't get treated like an emergency. It wasn't until the landlord noticed the rent hadn't been paid for 3 months that the first question was finally asked, "Where's Keisha?" And it would take 7 more years and a scribbled drawing from an unknown child of a woman named Mommy to shake the foundations of a nationwide investigation. Keisha Williams was born in 1989 in Albany, Georgia, where most adults juggled 2 jobs just to put a decent meal on the table. Her mother was a seamstress. Her father worked security at a Walmart warehouse. No one in the family had ever left the state of Georgia. Keisha was the first to get into community college, milestone she herself didn't think was a big deal. After graduating with a nursing degree, she moved to Atlanta and got a job at a senior care center. The work wasn't glamorous. 12-hour shifts, mostly changing bandages, checking vitals, and listening to elders long forgotten by everyone else. But Keisha never complained. She once wrote in her journal, "If you see me tired, remember, someone out there feels safe because I showed up." Her dreams were simple: save up to buy a small apartment with a little balcony for mint plants, and send her son Jalento a good elementary school, where teachers pronounced his name right and didn't judge his skin color. She lived in a housing complex for single mothers in South Atlanta, a place where cries at night weren't uncommon and late rent notices came often. But Keisha stayed out of conflict. No new boyfriends, no parties, no drama. She was the kind of person neighbors remembered only when her mailbox went untouched, because she was usually the first to bring in their mail, especially on rainy days. A quiet woman, respectful, independent. And maybe that's exactly why no one noticed when she disappeared. Jalen was born on a morning in April 2014 in the public maternity ward at Grady Memorial Hospital. Keisha held him to her chest, still catching her breath, and whispered, "You're going to be the best thing I ever do." There was no father beside her. The man of brief relationship after a night shift vanished when he learned she was pregnant. But Keisha didn't chase him. She didn't have time for heartbreak. From the moment Jalen came into the world, her life revolved around the small things: the folding chair she slept in while rocking him after night shifts, the bottles always stocked in the fridge, the jazz lullabies she believed would help him sleep peacefully. Jalen was different, not loud, not fussy, never cried when she came home late. Neighbors used to joke, "That boy waits till his mama's rested before asking for breakfast." Since he learned to walk, Jalen loved drawing colorful dinosaurs. He always had a green marker in hand, mumbling dinosaur names most adults couldn't pronounce. He didn't have many friends, but Keisha wasn't worried. She once wrote, "As long as he can love the world in his own way, I don't need the world to love him back right away." Every night, before leaving for her shift, Keisha read to her son, even if he was already asleep. "So if he wakes up halfway," she said, "he'll still feel like him right there." She set an alarm each morning to video call him before preschool, on their kitchen table. She posted a handwritten reminder: "Jalen, be kind. Mama's learning to forgive the world." Keisha never missed a promise, never made Jalen ask, "Where's Mommy?" which is why. When the two of them vanished, the first person to sense something was wrong wasn't the police or the neighbors. It was Jalen's preschool teacher, who had kept the drawing he gave her the week before, a picture of a green dinosaur standing next to a woman holding a stethoscope, the one Jalen called Supermom Keisha. The biggest question wasn't where Keisha and Jalen went. It was, why did it take 4 months for anyone to realize they were gone? The answer lies in the cracks of a system that keeps repeating itself, especially for women of color living alone, without nearby family, stable income, or ties to any group that matters. Keisha didn't disappear in some dramatic fashion. No screaming, no blood, no 911 calls. She just stopped paying rent, stopped showing up to work, stopped answering messages, and because nurses often switch shifts. No one noticed right away. The landlord thought she was skipping rent on purpose. The preschool marked Jalen as out for personal reasons. Her only close friend, Tesha, was undergoing treatment for depression at another facility and had no contact the entire summer. When someone from Keisha's workplace called to confirm her leave, they got a long voicemail beep and then nothing. Her file was marked voluntary resignation. No one thought to call the police because no one believed a quiet, single black mom, behind on rent, could be a missing person. No one thought to check her apartment because under lease rules, landlords weren't allowed in before the contract expired. When they finally brought a locksmith, they found the room neat, a half-eaten meal, and expired milk in the fridge. No signs of struggle, no goodbye note, no sign of a rushed departure. The first official report wasn't filed until Keisha's sister in Chicago called the local police, insisting Keisha would never leave Jalen like this. But with no evidence of a crime, the case was labeled insufficient grounds for investigation. And that's when all hope began to quietly fade, not because no one cared, but because everyone thought someone else would. Keisha became one of thousands of names added to the missing persons list that no one ever reads, according to records from the ranger station at Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge. A gray sedan with Georgia plates was logged entering the park's west side back gate early on the morning of August 3rd, 2017. The checkpoint camera had been down due to a technical failure, a frustrating coincidence that would spark years of controversy. But in the handwritten visitor log, one name appeared, Keisha W. Entry time, 7:16 a.m. That was it. No recorded exit, no confirmation that she ever came back out. And for months, no one noticed until a group of high school students, camping during a school trip, stumbled across a backpack buried in the mud near a side trail about 1.7 miles from the gate. Inside a children's photo book, a folded rain poncho, and an unopened yogurt cup, now swollen from fermentation. They turned it over to park rangers, but no one connected the backpack to Keisha because at the time, she hadn't been reported missing. The name tag had faded from water damage. No ID inside. Nothing appeared stolen or torn. So it was cataloged as another lost item and shelved in the evidence room with hundreds of others. After Keisha's sister called in a missing person report in November, investigators began retracing her steps. That's when they found her license plate had been logged entering Okefenokee. A search warrant was issued, though slowly, because there was still no sign of criminal activity. When investigators revisited the park ranger's evidence room, they took a closer look at the muddy backpack. Near the strap was a faint ink, stain blurred but still visible, the name Jalen W. Image analysis confirmed it. It was Jalen's backpack, the same one visible in photos Keisha posted to Facebook that summer. The backpack soaked, muddy, but intact and undisturbed was the first sign that something was seriously wrong. Because if mother and son had gotten lost, why leave behind food, a raincoat, or milk if they had been attacked? Why was there no damage? And if they'd left willingly, why would a 3-year-old's most important belongings be left behind? The bigger question, where was Keisha? Where was Jalen? And why hadn't anyone heard a single cry for help? Inside the backpack was one small detail no one noticed. At first, a worn metal keychain clipped to the inner pocket. Engraved on it were the words, "To my nurse hero love." C. That tiny inscription became the key to shifting the case from a disappearance to something far more disturbing. One investigator recognized it as the kind of personal gift a patient might give a caregiver, not something you'd typically find in a child's bag. Keisha had worked as a nurse aide, according to employment records at a nursing home in Waycross. She once cared for a resident named Carlton Johnson for nearly a year, a former serviceman with Parkinson's. He was known to be gruff but deeply fond of Keisha. Colleagues said he often called her my little nurse who listens. Police found Carlton, now nearly 80, living in another assisted living facility. His memory was fading, eyes clouded, most details long gone. But when shown the keychain, Carlton stared at it and whispered, "I meant to give that to her. She's gone. Isn't she?" when asked about family. Carlton had one son, Marcus Johnson, who had worked as a seasonal park ranger at Okefenokee during the summers of 2016 and 2017. Records showed Marcus had no criminal record, lived quietly in Florida, working in pool maintenance. When police went to Marcus' listed address, a small house near North Tampa's beaches, they found it abandoned. Neighbors said he'd left 3 weeks prior, said he was going on vacation with his new girlfriend, one neighbor recalled, but I never saw anyone pick him up inside. They found signs of a rushed departure, a half-eaten plate of food, an overflowing mailbox, and a personal laptop with its hard drive wiped clean. But one thing stopped. The team cold-taped to the fridge was a faded photo of a young black boy, about 3 or 4, smiling wide as he hugged a stuffed dinosaur. No name, no date. But the boy's eyes felt hauntingly familiar. The team returned to Okefenokee not to find lost hikers, but to search for evidence of a hidden crime. They focused on little-used trails in the park's southwestern region, where old ranger shacks had once been used during fire control efforts. On the 4th day of searching, K9 units alerted near a dense, swampy area almost 2 miles off the main trail. There, hidden beneath brush and layers of leaves, searchers uncovered a decaying wooden shack half sunken into the bog. No windows, a gaping hole in the roof, the air thick with mold and silence, but signs of life remained. Dust-covered tables smeared with green and red paint, clearly from children's markers. An empty Crayola box. Near the door, a small pair of Paw Patrol sneakers, just like the ones Jalen used to wear, and wedged in a crack between the floorboards. A silver necklace, engraved with one word, Keisha. Her sister had gifted that necklace at Keisha's nursing graduation. She wore it in every photo from 2012 to 2017, including the last image posted on Facebook. No one had ever seen her without it. Further inside the shack, investigators found one more detail that sucked the air out of the room. A crayon drawing taped to the wall with brittle old tape. It showed a curly-haired woman, a child beside her, and a large heart below it. In faded handwriting, Mommy. No clear fingerprints, no viable DNA. Time and humidity had wiped away almost all forensic evidence. But the investigators didn't need anything more to understand Keisha had been there, Jalen had drawn there, and someone had kept them there. At least for a while. The necklace had lost its shine, but for the family. It was proof that Keisha didn't leave by choice. Earl Simmons was one of the longest-serving rangers ever to work at Okefenokee. Nearly 40 years in the swamp. And though he couldn't remember every trail name, some memories stuck with him, especially one summer morning in 2017, just days after Keisha and Jalen were logged entering the park. Earl recalled patrolling the West Trail that day when he saw something strange. A white man, around 30 to 40 years old, thin build, wearing a hoodie and a baseball cap, carrying a young black boy out of the woods. The boy wasn't crying. He was holding a green stuffed toy tightly to his chest. They walked quickly toward the parking lot, where a brown pickup truck waited. At the time, Earl thought nothing of it, maybe a father and son returning late from a camping trip, but something didn't sit right. The morning was still heavy with fog, and the boy wasn't wearing shoes. Years later, that quiet memory resurfaced when Earl read about the case of Keisha and Jalen. When police interviewed him, he couldn't recall the exact date, but he could describe it clearly. Little black boy, maybe 3 or 4, holding a green dinosaur. His feet were filthy, like he'd just run through mud, and the man, he never looked at me. Not once. Based on Earl's description and the location of the sighting, police identified the area as close to the abandoned shack. They reviewed vehicle logs from that week in a short list of entries. One stood out, a 2005 brown Ford Ranger registered to Marcus Johnson Carlton's son, and a former seasonal ranger at Okefenokee. Marcus had no criminal record, but years earlier, he had been internally investigated at a previous job for inappropriate behavior toward female patients. The case was closed due to lack of evidence. But now, every piece was falling into place, like the edges of a very dark puzzle. A man who once knew Keisha, who had worked in the park, who had access, knowledge of patrol schedules, and the skills to hide in the swamp undetected. Earl's recollection wasn't enough to build a case, but it was a starting point, and when investigators returned to Marcus' Florida home, they found one more clue this time, hidden behind a framed picture, Marcus Johnson's. Tampa home was small, 1 story, 2 bedrooms, a modest kitchen, and a backyard overtaken by weeds. When police searched the house again with a new warrant, They didn't expect much. Marcus had been gone for nearly a month, and all electronics had been wiped clean. But a young investigator, flipping over a framed picture above the sofa, noticed something odd taped to the back was a small scrap of paper. On it the name Jalen W., scrawled in pencil, along with a few childish notes. 3 years old, likes green, hates ketchup. Police immediately compared the handwriting with the mommy drawing found in the shack. The match wasn't definitive. The writing was too childlike to confirm, but the coincidence couldn't be ignored. Someone had lived with Jalen long enough to know his eating habits and recorded them, as if trying to remember for themselves. What stunned investigators wasn't the paper, but what they found in the desk drawer, a small leather notebook, hidden beneath a lining of decorative paper. Inside were fragmented entries, like a diary, but unsigned. One read, "He didn't ask about her today. Maybe he's starting to forget." Another, "He flinches when he hears sirens. Does he remember in the final?" Nearly torn out page. "She screamed all night. I couldn't let him see. I locked her outside the shack, but her voice still reached him. I don't know how much he understands." No handwriting sample could prove who wrote it, but the words hit like salt in a wound. Was Keisha still alive during those first days in the woods? Was Jalen forced to forget his mother in ways no child ever should in the same drawer? They also found an old wind-up music box, child's toy that played lullabies when cranked. It was coated in dust. But underneath, a small handprint. Forensic testing confirmed it matched Jalen's childhood DNA, registered at the health center where Keisha once worked. It was the first physical proof Jalen had been in that house. No one knew how he got to Florida. There were no school records, no doctor visits, no insurance files for 3 years. It was like Jalen never existed. And the only person who might know the truth, Marcus Johnson, was still missing. While investigators continued the search for Marcus, a surprising lead emerged from an unexpected place, a nonprofit in Jacksonville, Florida, that helps undocumented and unhoused minors. They reported that in 2020, they'd taken in a young boy around 6 years old who displayed unusual behavior. He'd been found wandering near the Greyhound bus station in Gainesville. No ID, no clear memory of his full name. When asked about his parents, he said only, "My mom's a nurse. Her name's Keisha. She comes home late from work," and then nothing more. With no one stepping forward to claim him, he entered the state foster system, given the temporary name Jalen M. Over 3 years, Jalen remained quiet, withdrawn, but remarkably bright. He loved drawing dinosaurs, especially green ones. And with every new teacher, he asked the same question. "Do you know Mommy Keisha?" At first, staff dismissed it as fantasy, a trauma echo in a child's mind. No one checked the missing persons database, until a young social worker named Brianna came across an article about Keisha Williams and Jalen shared on social media via an independent true crime podcast. The photo of little Jalen holding a green dinosaur was identical to a drawing Jalen had once given her. A chill ran down her spine. She submitted an internal report and requested DNA testing. With the Child Welfare Agency's permission, a DNA sample was collected from Jalen. It was compared to a genetic profile submitted years earlier by Keisha's sister. The result made the entire investigative team hold their breath. Jalen was Jalen. There was no doubt. The boy who vanished at age 3 was now 10 lost in a web of fake names, false records, and system-wide oversight. The question was no longer, where is Jalen? It was who brought him here and what really happened to his mother, Keisha. Because in 3 years, Jalen never once mentioned another man. No father, no uncle, no mom's friend. Only one memory lingered sleeping in the woods, hearing his mother cry, and waking up one morning to find she was gone. Finding Jalen alive after all those years should have been a moment of joy. But for investigators and for Keisha's family, it was only the beginning of a long, painful journey filled with questions no one could easily answer. At the center of every suspicion now stood one man, Marcus Johnson, the only known link between Keisha and the place where she and her son had once been found. As the evidence piled up, the picture that emerged was far from clear. Marcus had once worked as a park ranger. He had wilderness survival skills. He had ties to Keisha through the nursing home where his father had been a patient. But most notably, during all the time Keisha worked there, There was no official record of any interaction between them. No texts, no emails, no calls. Investigators suspected Marcus had watched Keisha from a distance, possibly after his father's death, as a twisted response to his own isolation. But there was another angle to the case, one rarely discussed in public. Some of Marcus' old notebook entries suggested he believed he was rescuing the child from a dangerous situation. This led some psychologists to propose a disturbing theory that Marcus may have been suffering from a form of obsessive delusion. Believing Keisha was unfit to raise her son, in his mind, Jalen needed to be saved, even though the truth was just the opposite. Still, every theory ran into one brutal fact. If Marcus truly thought he was helping, why not call the police? Why go into hiding, create fake identities, and keep Jalen's existence a secret for 3 years? A seasoned FBI agent speculated that this could be a case of rescue fantasy turned abduction, where the perpetrator doesn't see himself as a criminal, but as someone doing the right thing, but to Keisha's family. No reasoning could ever justify taking a child from his mother and then disappearing into silence. And perhaps the cruelest truth of all, though Jalen had returned, his mother, Keisha, left behind no signs of life after that time. The shack only confirmed she had once been there. The necklace proved she had been present, but after that, nothing. As if she'd been swallowed by the swamp or by the hands of someone who believed himself a savior. What seemed like the unraveling of a mystery soon revealed a deeper fracture, not just in one man, but in the very system Keisha once trusted. Her disappearance wasn't just the act of an abductor. It was a chain of systemic failures, delayed reports, outdated procedures, and the quiet bias in deciding who's worth finding, even after Jalen was recovered. Early reports hesitated to use the word kidnapping. Instead, they used vague phrases: unauthorized custody, unclear placement, a child in unusual circumstances. Nowhere did it plainly say that this child had lived under a false identity, far from his mother. During the most formative years of his life, no one apologized. No one claimed responsibility. Keisha's sister, Denise, once spoke at a brief press conference. Her voice shook, but her eyes held firm. If Keisha had been a white nurse from Buckhead, this would have played out differently. I don't have to imagine, no. Her words didn't make national headlines, but they echoed in communities where far too many black women have vanished, leaving behind nothing but cold files and black and white photographs, even as investigators tried to elevate the case to the federal level. They ran up against legal limits. There was no concrete evidence Marcus had harmed Keisha, no surveillance, no witnesses, no confession. Just fading traces, a child's memories, nighttime screams, and a shack in the woods that stood like a ghost between truth and myth. Worse still. When Jalen was gently asked about the last night he saw his mother, he looked down and said only, "She told me to close my eyes until the sun came up." That one sentence, so simple, left behind a hole deeper than any clue could fill. No one knows what happened after that. Was Keisha forced to leave? Did she run in fear? Or did something end her presence in a way no one can name from then on? The story wasn't just about finding a missing woman. It became a search for something even harder to locate: trust and justice in the system, and in the belief that this country can protect mothers who have no voice. That trust was broken, and no one can say if it will ever fully heal. A few weeks after Jalen's identity was confirmed, and he was placed in the care of his Aunt Denise, small changes began to emerge. At first, he wouldn't sleep unless the lights were on. Then came his refusal to eat anything red. Denise assumed it was emotional trauma, the aftermath of years spent without his mother. But then, one quiet morning, Jalen sat alone at the kitchen table with a box of crayons and drew something that left the entire family speechless. On the page, he sketched the wooden shack in vivid detail, from the hole in the roof to the dark patches on the walls. Outside, the shack stood a curly-haired woman, her head bowed, hands tied behind her back. Near her was a faceless man, just a blurred outline wearing a baseball cap, at the top of the drawing. Jalen had written one sentence: "Mommy told me not to tell." Denise brought the drawing to investigators. They immediately brought in child psychologists to work gently with Jalen. After several weeks of careful, compassionate sessions, the boy shared a fragmented story. His mother had been locked inside the shack. Sometimes she was hurt. He could hear her calling his name, but he wasn't allowed to leave his bed. And then one night, it rained hard. The next morning, she was gone. The man told him Mommy went to work. She'll be back soon. She never came back. Investigators returned to the site one more time, this time with ground-penetrating radar. They suspected Keisha may have been buried nearby, but the scan revealed nothing. No body, no new evidence, just the fading memory of a child and a drawing that made grown adults go silent. The deeper they dug, the more paradoxical the case became. Every detail pointed to the fact that Keisha didn't walk away on her own, that she had been stripped of her chance to live, but there was still no evidence strong enough to hold up in court. No witnesses, no surveillance, no confession. Just a boy with scars on his memory and a family still trying to recover the presence of a woman the system never truly saw. As the investigative team worked to compile their final report for the Georgia District Attorney, they were faced with a chilling reality. No theory was solid enough to prosecute. Marcus Johnson, the prime suspect, was still missing. There was no proof Keisha had been killed, no body, no cause of death, no direct evidence of harm. Even if Marcus were found, a defense attorney could easily argue no body, no crime. Meanwhile, the media caught wind of the case again. Morning news shows interviewed Denise. A few true crime podcasts dissected the file, but the truth remained suspended, cold, and unresolved. Like the space Keisha left behind, every theory had holes. Every lead ended in silence. One forensic psychologist involved in the case made a chilling observation. The biggest loss here isn't just a missing body. It's a truth buried under layers of silence. Silence from the perpetrator, silence from the system, and silence from all of us. Inside the investigative unit, some began to believe Keisha may have died in the forest. Her body never recovered, either overtaken by wildlife or destroyed by the elements. Others feared something darker, that she had been transported out of state, possibly along old ranger trails, and now lies somewhere no one would ever think to look. And Jalen lives in a new home, under a name the system gave him, carrying a story that's never been fully told. He still occasionally asks Aunt Denise, why hasn't Mommy come back yet? And each time, Denise holds him close, swallowing her tears, unsure what to say, because the truth is too painful, and a lie would be far too cruel. In the end, it was silence, the very thing the system used to bury Keisha's case for years, that became the loudest evidence of all, because Keisha left no goodbye, no note, no final voice message. No one heard her last scream. But her absence, persistent, undeniable, and searing is the voice no one can ignore. It is the voice of a mother who once existed, who once loved, who once tried, and who was forgotten for far too long. In the spring of 2024, Denise was officially granted legal guardianship of Jalen, now 10 years old. Their two-bedroom apartment in South Chicago was rearranged en room for Denise. The other transformed into Jalen's world, filled with dinosaur models, colorful drawings, and a single photograph taped to his closet door. It showed Keisha smiling, wearing her silver necklace, holding an ice cream cone, sunlight catching in her curls like a soft halo. Jalen still couldn't recall everything he had been through. And maybe he didn't need to. What he did know was enough, that his mom loved him, read him stories at night, and once told him, be kind, because I'm still learning to forgive the world. For a child, that memory is everything. The family remained in contact with the police, even though the case had now been officially moved to open but inactive status. No one said it out loud, but everyone understood without a body, without a suspect, without a confession, the case would likely never be closed. And Keisha, like hundreds of other missing women of color across America, had become a painful symbol, a mother who vanished, and wasn't truly searched for until it was far too late. Yet in all that was lost, something remained, something that couldn't be erased. Love, the love of a mother for her child, powerful enough to cut through darkness, silence, and the system's failure, and the love of a child who may never fully understand what happened, yet still believes his mother was a hero. Denise still keeps Keisha's silver necklace in a small velvet box. She doesn't wear it, doesn't display it, only opens it when she needs to feel her sister's presence. On quiet nights, after Jalen has fallen asleep, she reads through Keisha's journal, the gentle handwriting, dreaming of simple things. I just want my child to grow up in a world that knows how to listen. Keisha never asked for much, but the world still failed to hear her until it was too late. On what would have been Keisha's 35th birthday, a small vigil was held at a local park. No banners, no speeches, just a few dozen people, old friends, former neighbors, co-workers, those who had fallen out of touch during her disappearance, but were moved by her story. I thought she just left the job suddenly. I figured she moved out of state. I didn't think anything bad happened. She always seemed so strong. Those words, casual, honest, captured exactly why Keisha vanished without a sound. She was the kind of woman people forget. Not loud, not visible, no powerful family, no safety net. But that didn't mean she didn't matter. It only meant our society still doesn't know how to value quiet lives. Denise once shared that during a community forum. Someone asked if Keisha had been a white nurse from Buckhead with 2 kids in a nice suburb, would the system have let her disappear for 4 months without raising alarm? No one answered. No one needed to. Everyone knew the truth. Jalen now. Jalen no longer asks where his mother is. He's learning to move forward, to build new memories, and to carry her in his heart as something that can never be taken away. But every now and then, when he sees someone in a purple scrub top the color Keisha used to wear, he still turns his head, just for a second. In a short blog post, a young journalist wrote, "Some people don't go missing because they disappeared. They go missing because we never truly saw them in the first place. Keisha Williams was one of them, and her story, though it may never have a clean ending, remains a mirror, a reminder." To ask ourselves, are we paying enough attention? Do we truly believe that every mother deserves to be heard, searched for, and protected, no matter where she lives, what she does, or what color her skin is? That's an open question, and maybe it will never have a complete answer. But if you're still listening to this story, then Keisha hasn't been forgotten.